All right, is everybody able to hear me now? Good. I'm glad to see that the real core group is here. We don't have to deal with all the socializers. These are people who've given up at least some of your supper time to come in, and I'm very appreciative of it. And Bob, I'm very appreciative of what your group is doing here. I think it is historical, and I'm very pleased to be part of it. I'd like to start by telling you something that happened earlier this year. In January of '94, while I was working on the research and getting ready to publish my first research report, which is a book called Taken: Inside the Alien-Human Abduction Agenda. I was talking with one of the 8 women whose cases I'm reporting on in this book. Her name is Angie. She's in Tennessee. I'm in Arkansas. We were on the phones, and both of our phones were regular phones, not cellular or anything like that. In the course of our conversation, Angie was telling me about a recent abduction experience she had just had, in which this particular group of humanoid-looking so-called hybrid aliens were with her in a facility, and they told her they came from the area of Cassiopeia, and the constellation. And she said, "Karla, what do you think about that? Is there any possible way this might be true?" And I said, "Well, Angie, the aliens have given us any number of alleged origins for where they come from, everything from Mars to the planet Banlon to, the Pleiades. But we don't have any way to check this out, so we don't have any reason to believe or disbelieve what they say without some sort of confirmation. Who knows where they come from?" At that point, there was an electronic zip sound on our phone connection, and a very human male voice came on the line and said, "There's a lot of them out there, and we know where they come from." And then there was a little electronic zip, and the man was gone. And then I picked the phone up off the floor. So, to tell you that this is a phenomenon, the abduction scenario, that involves not only non-human entities from a place unknown as far as we can verify, it also involves very, very human agencies who monitor abduction experiences and events, who perform surveillance upon abductees, who initiate intimidation and harassment upon abductees, and at times, as you'll see in my book and in my presentation tonight, they abduct abductees and interrogate them, often with threats and often with the use of drugs and other mind control techniques, trying to elicit information from us about what is going on. And so that's sort of where we're going to head. I just wanted to let you know this is not simply secondhand reports. My family, in its own experiences, has had military, human agency involvement, and so have 4 of the 8 cases I report about in Taken. And I think here at least is one of those handles we've been looking for. How do we get hold of something so elusive that it can pop in and out of our reality, can put us under immediate control when it happens, can alter our perceptions to be whatever they want it to be, and we can do nothing in return? When there is a human element involved, there is the opportunity to do something about this. And in this phenomenon, there is very definitely a human element involved. Now, I'm going to get there. I wanted just to start and let you know we're dealing with a real phenomenon I have witnessed repeatedly, have had multiple witnesses with me in some of these instances, and we're going to try to blow the lid off a little bit further off the abduction phenomena as you may have known it to this point. How many of you are pretty well read on the abduction scenario? So I don't need to do a whole lot of background work. All right, great. Well, first you might want to know who I am and why I'm up here to begin with, but the reason I'm up here is because aliens decided that they wanted to mess with my family. And they chose a family that was very happy and active and productive. In 1987, in December, my husband had a sighting in the daytime of a large spherical metallic craft hanging over the courthouse in the town where we lived in the North Texas area. He couldn't identify what it was as he was driving the car, so when he came home, he parked the car and walked about half a block up a hill to where we had a view of downtown, which was less than about a mile away. And this object was hanging over the courthouse in the daytime. He watched it, he said, and I wasn't here, I was out delivering Christmas presents because it was right before Christmas. He watched it for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, no more than that. It never moved, it never changed. He couldn't see wind affect it. He couldn't see anything dangling from it like a balloon might have. And he said he finally gave up and turned around to walk home, and lo and behold, it was dark. He didn't understand how it got so dark in the 5 or 10 minutes he was standing there, but he shrugged it off and came home. And when I returned that night, he said, I saw the darndest thing over the courthouse. I wonder what it was. And he told me his description of it. Large, metallic, spheroid, unmoving object. And we said, oh, well, they must be filming a movie in town, because our town is one where movies have been filmed fairly frequently. Let's look in the newspapers and see what movie they're filming so we can go down and watch them work. That's a fun thing to do. So we looked in the paper that weekend, and there was no mention of a movie, nor was there a mention of this large metallic object over the courthouse, and we forgot about it. Not once in our conversations did the term UFO ever come up. We didn't even think of it. It wasn't part of anything we dealt with. We were not prone to this subject. We had not read on this subject. I was a college instructor of English, had been for 10 years. My husband was a computer systems analyst. My son was a graduate student in physics. We were doing a very normal set of activities in our lives, and UFOs were simply not part of that. But when, several months later, stress had taken its toll, unknown caused stress, in both of our lives, to the extent that we were driven to seek counseling and physical help for some of these symptoms, hypnosis was used with me to help teach me how to relax the symptoms of stress I was having. And when my husband's counselor finally dismissed him and said, I'm sorry, I can't find the cause of your stress, I offered to show him how to do self-hypnosis so he could relax the symptoms he was having, which included blinding headache, back pain, paralysis and numbness in one leg from the hip all the way down to the foot, partial blindness, nausea, etc. I was having TMJ symptoms that I had never had. My teeth and jaws were clenching so tight I was deforming the muscles in my face and neck. Again, for no known reason. I was at the point where they were considering surgery to correct this. And we didn't know why we were stressed out. The first night that I taught my husband how to do self-hypnosis so he could relax his symptoms was May 2nd, 1988. When he was sufficiently into a trance, and by the way, he went into it fairly easily, and I'd never done hypnosis on anyone. I'd only had it done on me a couple of times, but it was an easy process to get into a trance state. I played therapist, and I said, why don't you ask your subconscious to tell you what the cause of your stress is? And he said, okay, and mentally asked his subconscious to show him the cause of his stress. My husband was lying on the couch at this time, prone, and all of a sudden he let out this yelp and literally levitated off the couch in fright. You've heard of jumping in fright? He jumped from a lying position. He said, I see a face. Oh my God, I see a face. And then he saw a gigantic craft. He said the size of a small city. Just then the telephone rang. Now here's my husband under hypnosis for the first time with someone who's only been in hypnosis a couple of times herself, suddenly talking about this weird, scary face and this gigantic ship, and my phone rings. Now what do? I said, hold on, and I ran to pick up the phone, which was no farther than from here to the wall. I picked up the phone and said hello, and there was no answer. I said hello, and there was no answer, and just as I was about to hang up, I started getting screeched at, jabbered at, electronically garbled at by something that sounded very, very angry. This went on for 10 to 15, maybe 20 seconds. I was in stunned response, and then it suddenly went dead and the line was gone. I didn't have time to deal with this. I had a husband on the couch freaking out under hypnosis. So I simply hung up the phone and went back to see if I could bring him out of this trance because we didn't know what was going on. This was the beginning of an odyssey that led me far, far away from the academic community. A couple of months later brought me, fortunately, into contact with Barbara Barthlick, whom you heard earlier this afternoon, who was gracious enough to take on our situation and help us to investigate what was going on in our lives. And the story of everything that we uncovered in that first year and a half of investigations is presented in a book that was published in 1992 by Berkeley called Into the Fringe. If you're interested in the story of what my husband, my son, his fiance, his roommate, and several other family members went through during this literal siege or invasion for about 18 months in our lives, very consciously as well as on the subconscious level, with all sorts of corroborating external evidence, then I recommend you might want to look at the book. Now, it's only a $5 paperback. Most people can find it at a used bookstore, and I told them I really appreciated that because most of my friends were not rich enough to afford those hardback books. So it's at least one of the things that is available if you're interested in the personal account and the heroic work that Barbara did with us to bring us through a time when we were so lost. We did not know what to do. We were followed by unmarked cars. We had lived in the same house for 5 years with never a helicopter over our house, and beginning at this time we had almost daily helicopter strafing, sometimes in the middle of the night so loud the windows almost broke from the activity, sometimes as many as 9 in a day, circling and circling our house. We began to have interference on our telephone calls, and never when we were talking about recipes or the family or work, but only when UFOs were the subject of conversations. We began to have tampering with our mail, and my daughter-in-law, future daughter-in-law at that time, who was an ROTC scholarship student and was in the process of getting out of the ROTC because of medical reasons, was at a point where she had to sign up a duty request when she graduated, and she was a physicist, studying physics at the time, and she needed to be near her medical specialist for her problem, which would give her only one choice of an assignment, which was meteorology. When she went to the ROTC sergeant on the campus and signed that she wanted to be attached to a meteorological base, the sergeant absolutely flipped out and said, "You can't do this. You're a physicist. Don't you want to sign up for the R&D work? Don't you want to work on the UFOs and find out what really is going on with them and not what the public thinks?" This from a sergeant in the Air Force to my daughter-in-law, who had never mentioned any of our activity to anyone other than us, except on the phone. So that's just a little of the background of why we're here, because at one point, before we met Barbara, my husband and I stood holding each other in a kitchen, quaking, shaking, fearful, uncertain of what was going on, and said, "We don't know what's going on, but by God, if we ever find out anything about this, we promise to help other people who are in our situations to learn." And we have been doing that ever since. That's why I'm here today, and not in some classroom teaching Beowulf. All right, now then, what are we really dealing with in this alien-human abduction agenda is what I want to talk about tonight. And what I have to tell you is that we're in the midst of an extremely serious situation. Those of us in the UFO community have had a failure to communicate to the public at large just how urgent and serious the situation is, and we're working very hard, some of us, to try to correct that lack of communication. This is not a matter for philosophical discussion anymore, my friends. This is something that is real, intense, in our faces, in our bedrooms, in our children's lives, in our families' lives. And if you've never had an experience, I can guarantee there's someone you work with or someone in your family or someone in your neighborhood who has. It is that widespread. If everyone who had had this experience suddenly had a little red light glow above their heads in this country, you would be so shocked to find out not only the number, but the types of people who are subjected to the alien intrusions and who never talk about it. And now you might understand, having talked it yourself, among others who haven't had this, you might have found out why they don't talk about it. There is rejection, disbelief, questioning of sanity and credibility, loss of jobs, loss of marriage, loss of self-confidence, and loss of reality, basically. You have to start from scratch when this intrudes into your life. And the moment you admit it to somebody else, you have to start facing it. So many, many people never admit it. And we can understand why. I'm going to talk at some length about the research I'm reporting on in Taken and also in a book that will be out next month, and I'm sorry I don't have it with me right now to show you because I think this is probably the most important work I've ever done. Barbara and I have worked on this case for over 2 years. It reports on one